Every day begins long before the sun rises, long before the noise of the world, before obligations compete for attention, before fear and distraction attempt to take their place on the throne of the mind, a quiet window opens. It is in this window that destinies are either aligned or subtly displaced. Scripture does not treat the morning casually. From the earliest pages we see a God who acts, speaks, and reveals himself at the break of day. Light is introduced before labor. Order precedes activity. Blessing is established before movement. The morning is not merely a time on the clock, it is a spiritual principle. It is the moment when authority is easiest to exercise because the day has not yet been contaminated by reaction. Prosperity, as revealed in Scripture, is never random. It is the result of alignment with divine structure. Those who understand this do not rush into the day unprepared. They intercept it. They speak before they listen. They submit before they strive. What you do first determines what follows. If the unseen is ignored in the morning, it will dominate you by the afternoon. But if blessing is activated early, the rest of the day is forced to comply. This is not superstition, it is strategy. Morning is not simply the first segment of the day, it is a threshold where authority is either claimed or surrendered. Before the world asserts its demands, before circumstances attempt to define identity or direction, there exists a brief but powerful interval in which alignment can occur. This alignment is not emotional optimism or positive thinking. It is the deliberate positioning of one's will under divine order. The morning functions as a gateway because it precedes reaction. Whoever speaks first into the day establishes the framework through which everything else will operate. Scripture repeatedly reveals that beginnings carry disproportionate influence. The first light did not merely illuminate creation, it structured it. The pattern is consistent. God establishes order before activity, meaning before motion, and purpose before productivity. When this pattern is ignored, effort increases while results diminish. The morning, therefore, is the most strategic point of intervention because it governs trajectory. Once momentum is set, correction becomes difficult. Direction chosen early requires far less force than direction changed later. Spiritual authority is most effective when exercised before resistance solidifies. In the morning, the mind is quieter, the will is less fragmented, and the heart has not yet been crowded by urgency. This is not accidental, it is designed. The human spirit is most receptive when it has not yet been trained to react. Reaction is costly. It places circumstances in command. Alignment, however, places truth in command. Those who wait until pressure arrives before seeking direction have already conceded ground. Destiny is rarely lost through dramatic collapse. It is usually displaced through subtle neglect. The morning is where this displacement begins, when the first moments of the day are surrendered to noise, worry, or unconscious routine. An invisible transaction takes place. Authority shifts. External forces begin to dictate internal posture. By the time decisions are made later in the day, they are no longer free decisions, they are responses. Prosperity cannot be sustained in a life governed by reaction because reaction is always one step behind purpose. The early hours invite intentionality. To engage the morning deliberately is to declare that the day will not define you. You will define the day. This is not arrogance, it is stewardship. Authority was always intended to be exercised, not admired. When one aligns with divine intention early, the rest of the day inherits that alignment automatically. Challenges do not disappear, but they lose their power to redirect. Resistance still exists, but it encounters an established order rather than a vacuum. Many misunderstand prosperity as accumulation, but Scripture frames it as alignment. When alignment is present, provision follows naturally. The morning is where alignment is easiest because the competing voices have not yet arrived in full force. What is affirmed early becomes reinforced later. What is neglected early must be fought for later. The difference is not effort, but timing. The gateway nature of morning also explains why it is contested. Distraction feels strongest at the start of the day because interruption is strategic. If the beginning is compromised, the outcome is already influenced. This is why discipline in the morning produces disproportionate results. A small act of alignment early carries the weight of a large act of correction later. The principle is simple but demanding. Guard the beginning, and the ending will take care of itself. Those who consistently honor the morning discover that clarity replaces confusion and purpose overrides pressure. Decisions become simpler because direction was established before complexity arrived. This is not mysticism, it is structure. When the foundation is set correctly, the building stands with less strain. Destiny responds to order. Blessing flows where alignment is maintained. The morning does not ask for perfection, it asks for priority. Even brief, intentional alignment outweighs extended activity done without direction. To step into the day consciously aligned is to activate authority before resistance, blessing before battle, and purpose before pursuit. The gateway will open whether one is aware of it or not. The question is not whether the morning matters, but who will occupy it first. Prosperity, as revealed in Scripture, is never portrayed as an accident or a stroke of luck. It is consistently presented as the natural consequence of alignment with divine order. This order is not arbitrary, it is precise, intentional, and rooted in obedience. When prosperity is detached from obedience, it becomes fragile and unsustainable. When it flows from alignment, it becomes stable and purposeful. The misunderstanding of prosperity begins when it is reduced to accumulation rather than understood as the outcome of living in harmony with God's design. Divine order governs every aspect of creation. Nothing thrives outside of it. Stars remain in their courses, seasons follow appointed times, and harvest responds to seed. Human life is no different. Prosperity emerges when actions correspond to the structure God has established. Obedience, therefore, is not about restriction, it is about alignment. It places the individual in the current of divine flow rather than struggling against it. Resistance to order produces friction, and friction always consumes energy that could have been used for growth. Scripture links prosperity to attentiveness. Those who listen carefully and act accordingly experience increase, not because they are favored arbitrarily, but because they are positioned correctly. Attention precedes provision. Neglect of instruction often masquerades as misfortune, but the underlying issue is misalignment. When people ignore divine patterns, they still exert effort, but effort alone cannot substitute for order. Productivity without alignment results in exhaustion rather than abundance. Discipline plays a central role in this process. Discipline is the practical expression of obedience. It translates belief into behavior. Prosperity is sustained not by occasional enthusiasm, but by consistent alignment. Small, repeated acts of obedience create an environment where blessing can remain. This is why Scripture emphasizes faithfulness in small matters. What appears insignificant in isolation becomes decisive over time. Alignment compounds. Disorder compounds as well. Many assume that prosperity should arrive before obedience, but Scripture reverses this expectation. Obedience is the seed, prosperity is the harvest. Seeds do not demand proof before being planted. They require trust in the structure that governs growth. When obedience is delayed until conditions appear favorable, the opportunity for alignment is often missed. Divine order does not adjust to convenience. It invites participation at the appointed time. The concept of prosperity also includes clarity of purpose. A life aligned with divine order experiences fewer internal contradictions. Decisions become simpler because values are established. Resources are stewarded rather than wasted because priorities are clear. Prosperity without purpose creates confusion, but prosperity with purpose reinforces direction. Scripture consistently ties increase to responsibility, not indulgence. The blessing is given to advance intention, not to replace it. Resistance to divine order often stems from a desire for autonomy, yet Scripture reveals that true freedom is found within structure, not outside it. A train is free because it remains on its tracks. Remove the tracks, and movement becomes destruction. In the same way, obedience does not limit prosperity, it enables it. Divine order provides boundaries within which growth can occur without collapse. When prosperity is pursued as an end in itself, it becomes elusive. When alignment is pursued, prosperity follows naturally. This inversion is central to the biblical worldview. The focus is never on gain alone, but on relationship with order. Scripture warns that gain without alignment brings sorrow, not satisfaction. The issue is not abundance, but foundation. Daily life reveals this principle repeatedly. When priorities are set correctly, resources seem sufficient. When priorities are confused, scarcity appears even in abundance. Prosperity responds to structure. It settles where order is honored. This is why consistent obedience produces long-term stability, while shortcuts produce temporary relief followed by loss. Ultimately, prosperity is a byproduct of living within divine architecture. It is not forced, it is attracted. Alignment draws provision the way proper conditions draw growth. Scripture does not promise prosperity as a reward for effort alone, but as a result of obedience to order. Those who understand this stop striving for blessing and begin cultivating alignment. In doing so, they discover that prosperity was never something to chase, but something that emerges naturally when life is positioned correctly within God's design. The unseen realm does not operate on human clocks, yet Scripture makes clear that there are appointed times when spiritual activity intensifies. The morning stands out as one of those strategic windows. While the physical world is still quiet, the spiritual environment is already active. This is not mystical speculation, but a consistent biblical pattern that reveals timing as a form of wisdom. The early hours are significant because they occur before human will is fragmented by demand, distraction, and reaction. Spiritual positioning is most effective when it precedes pressure. In the morning, the soul has not yet been crowded by urgency, and the mind has not been trained into defensive thinking. This creates a rare alignment between intention and attention. When prayer, declaration, or meditation on truth occurs at this time, it encounters less internal resistance. The heart is more receptive, not because of emotion, but because fewer competing voices are present. What enters first often governs what follows. Scripture repeatedly implies that unseen activity precedes visible manifestation. Decisions are shaped before events unfold. Outcomes are influenced long before they appear inevitable. The morning is critical because it intersects with this pre-manifest stage. Engaging spiritually at this point is not about reacting to problems, but about positioning ahead of them. One does not pray in the morning to fix the day, one prays to frame it. Words spoken early carry unusual weight because they are released into an uncluttered environment. Later in the day, words must compete with accumulated impressions, fears, and distractions. Early declarations encounter fewer obstacles. This is why Scripture emphasizes speaking, proclaiming, and seeking early. It reflects an understanding that influence is easier to establish before patterns harden. Once emotional and mental momentum has formed, altering direction requires significantly more effort. Neglecting this window does not leave a neutral space. If intentional engagement does not occur, something else will fill the gap. Anxiety, habit, and external influence eagerly occupy unguarded beginnings. This is why many days feel hijacked rather than directed. The issue is not lack of effort later, but lack of positioning early. By the time awareness arises, the unseen framework of the day is already in place. Spiritual warfare, when mentioned in Scripture, is rarely depicted as frantic struggle. It is strategic positioning. Authority is exercised through alignment, not volume. The morning offers an opportunity to assert that alignment before opposition organizes itself. This does not mean resistance disappears. It means resistance meets an established order rather than a vacuum. An ordered environment resists intrusion more effectively than one formed under pressure. There is also a reciprocal principle at work. When one consistently engages the unseen realm early, sensitivity increases. Discernment sharpens. Decisions feel less reactive and more intuitive, not because intuition replaces reason, but because spiritual alignment informs perception. Over time, the early hours become a training ground where clarity is cultivated. This clarity then carries into the visible realm, shaping responses throughout the day. The modern tendency to rush immediately into information, communication, and consumption undermines this process. Noise fragments attention before alignment can occur. Scripture's emphasis on early seeking stands in contrast to this pattern. It suggests that priority, not convenience, determines influence. What is honored first reveals what governs most. Engaging the unseen realm in the morning is not about length or intensity, but about intention. Even brief, focused alignment establishes authority. The power lies not in the duration, but in the timing. A short act of positioning early often outweighs extended effort later. This is because the foundation has already been set. Ultimately, the morning serves as a strategic intersection between the unseen and the seen. It is the point where alignment can be established before manifestation unfolds. Those who recognize this treat the early hours with reverence, not ritualistically but strategically. They understand that engaging early is not about escaping reality, but about shaping it. When the unseen realm is acknowledged first, the visible realm follows its lead, and the day unfolds within an order that was quietly established before the world fully awakened. Words are never neutral in Scripture. They are carriers of intent, vehicles of authority, and instruments through which realities are framed. What is spoken does not merely describe conditions, it participates in shaping them. This is why timing matters. Words released at dawn possess a distinct potency because they are spoken into a day that has not yet been defined. Before events unfold, before narratives form, Before emotions settle into patterns, the spoken word enters an open field. The morning amplifies the effect of words because it precedes accumulation. Later in the day, words must contend with impressions already layered onto the mind, conversations, news, frustrations, and fears. Early words encounter less resistance. They are not correcting, they are establishing. Scripture reflects this repeatedly through the emphasis on declaring, blessing, and seeking early. These actions assume that what is articulated first exerts governing influence over what follows. Prophetic weight is not about prediction alone. It is about alignment with truth spoken at the right moment. A word spoken in harmony with divine intention carries authority because it resonates with existing order. In the morning, the internal environment is quieter, making resonance clearer. The heart is less defensive, the mind less reactive. This allows spoken truth to settle deeper, shaping perception before distortion can take root. Many underestimate how quickly internal narratives form. By midday, assumptions have already been made. Emotional positions are established. Responses are rehearsed subconsciously. Attempting to redirect the day after this point often feels like resistance against oneself. Morning words, however, precede narrative formation. They act as anchors. When later pressures arise, the mind unconsciously refers back to what was established first. This is not psychological manipulation, it is structure. Scripture emphasizes blessing spoken early because blessing is not a wish, it is a release of alignment. To bless is to speak in agreement with God's intention. When this agreement is voiced before competing interpretations emerge, it becomes the dominant frame. Prosperity, peace, and clarity are not forced into existence. They are invited through declaration aligned with truth. Silence in the morning is not neutral either. When intentional words are withheld, unintentional ones take their place. Internal dialogue fills the vacuum, often shaped by fear, memory, or habit. These unexamined words quietly establish direction. By the time conscious awareness engages, the trajectory is already leaning. This is why Scripture does not merely encourage early prayer, but early declaration. Speaking is an act of governance. The prophetic dimension of morning words lies in their forward-facing nature. They do not respond to what is seen, they address what is coming. This orientation trains the heart to lead rather than follow. It reinforces the principle that faith operates ahead of evidence. When words are spoken in the morning, they align expectation with promise rather than circumstance. Expectation then influences behavior, and behavior influences outcome. Consistency strengthens this effect. Repeated early declarations reinforce internal order. Over time, the mind learns what governs the day. This reduces internal conflict and hesitation. Decisions become clearer because the framework is familiar. The spoken word, revisited daily at the beginning, becomes a stabilizing force that resists fragmentation. The power is not in volume or emotion, but in agreement. Words spoken early in agreement with truth establish continuity between intention and action. When the day presents challenges, responses are shaped by what was declared, not merely by what is felt. This creates resilience. Pressure may increase, but direction remains intact. Prosperity is influenced by this process because prosperity depends on clarity and consistency. Confused words produce confused outcomes. Aligned words produce aligned actions. The morning provides the optimal moment to ensure that what is spoken reflects what is intended. This prevents contradiction between belief and behavior. Ultimately, the weight carried by morning words is a reflection of timing, not mysticism. They are released into a space that is still forming. They help determine how that space will be filled. Scripture's emphasis on early declaration reveals a deep understanding of how reality unfolds. First framed, then filled. Those who speak with intention at dawn are not attempting to control outcomes. They are cooperating with order. In doing so, they discover that words spoken early echo throughout the day, quietly shaping paths, responses, and results long after the moment of speaking has passed. Neglect is rarely recognized as a decision, yet Scripture treats it as one with measurable consequences. To ignore the morning is not to remain neutral, it is to allow another influence to take the lead. Authority never remains vacant. If it is not exercised intentionally, it is assumed by default. The early hours are especially sensitive because they establish the tone of governance for the rest of the day. When that window passes without engagement, the agenda is set elsewhere. The idea that the day can simply be handled later misunderstands how influence operates. By the time demands arise, internal posture has already been shaped, thoughts have been triggered, emotions have been stirred, and assumptions have quietly taken root. These processes do not wait for conscious permission. They fill the space left by inattention. Scripture's repeated call to vigilance reflects this reality. Awareness must precede activity if direction is to be preserved. When the morning is ignored, reaction becomes the primary mode of operation. Reaction feels efficient because it responds to what is immediately present, but it is costly because it surrenders initiative. Decisions made in reaction are shaped by pressure rather than purpose. Over time, this creates a pattern where life feels driven rather than directed. Prosperity struggles to take root in such an environment because prosperity requires consistency, and consistency requires intention. External forces are always prepared to define the day. Information, urgency, and expectation arrive early and aggressively. Without prior alignment, the mind accepts these inputs as governing reality. What was intended to be engaged selectively becomes absorbed uncritically. This is why distraction is strongest at the start of the day. It is not random, it is strategic. Whoever occupies the beginning influences the outcome. Scripture often contrasts wisdom with folly by emphasizing attentiveness versus neglect. Neglect is not always dramatic. It is subtle and habitual. It disguises itself as busyness or fatigue, yet its effect is cumulative. Each neglected morning compounds the sense of being behind, making intentional engagement feel increasingly difficult. This creates a cycle where reaction reinforces neglect and neglect reinforces reaction. When spiritual alignment is postponed, later efforts must work against momentum already established. Correction always requires more energy than direction. This is why days that begin without intention often feel heavier, even when tasks are simple. The burden is not the activity itself, but the absence of an ordered foundation. Scripture warns that labor without alignment leads to weariness, not fruitfulness. Neglect also impacts perception. Without early clarity, discernment dulls. Decisions are made based on urgency rather than value. Opportunities are missed not because they are absent, but because the lens through which they are viewed has been distorted. Prosperity often passes unnoticed in a reactive life because it does not announce itself loudly. It requires attentiveness to be recognized and stewarded. The danger of neglect is that it normalizes disorder. When reaction becomes routine, misalignment feels familiar. Over time, this erodes confidence and initiative. People begin to believe that being overwhelmed is inevitable rather than a symptom of surrendered beginnings. Scripture consistently challenges this mindset by calling for early engagement, early seeking, and early obedience. These are not moral imperatives alone, they are strategic instructions. Reclaiming the morning reverses this process. Intentional engagement restores initiative. It reestablishes authority where it was unconsciously surrendered. Even small acts of alignment early disrupt patterns of reaction. The shift may feel subtle at first, but its effects accumulate. Direction replaces drift. Choice replaces compulsion. The cost of neglect is not always immediate loss, but gradual displacement. Destiny is nudged off course incrementally, not through catastrophe, but through unattended beginnings. Scripture's emphasis on guarding and watching reflects an awareness of this process. What is not guarded is eventually governed by something else. Ultimately, neglecting the morning is not about time management, it is about governance. It determines who sets the agenda, purpose, or pressure. Prosperity flourishes where governance is intentional, not assumed. By recognizing that the morning is a point of decision rather than convenience, one can break the cycle of reaction. The day does not need to be fought, it needs to be framed. When the beginning is reclaimed, the rest follows with far less resistance, and life shifts from being managed under pressure to being lived under purpose. Hope, when left undefined, can become passive. Scripture never presents hope as wishful waiting, but as confident expectation grounded in engagement. Activating morning blessings requires more than belief in possibility. It requires intentional participation with what has been promised. Divine provision is not released into passivity. It responds to alignment, attention, and deliberate action. The morning is the appointed space where this engagement is meant to occur. Promises in Scripture are not self-executing. They are invitations into cooperation. When people assume that blessing will manifest without participation, they misunderstand the nature of covenant. Covenant is relational and responsive. It involves listening, responding, and positioning. The morning provides the clearest opportunity for this because it precedes the distractions that fragment focus and weaken resolve. Engagement early is not about earning favor, it is about honoring structure. Passive hope often delays action until conditions feel favorable. Scripture consistently reverses this pattern. Action precedes evidence. Obedience comes before outcome. Those who wait for clarity before engagement often remain stationary, not because clarity is unavailable, but because clarity is revealed through movement. The morning is designed for this initial movement. It is where intention is translated into practice. Activating blessing requires specificity. Vague belief produces vague results. Scripture demonstrates that when people engaged God early, they did so with intention, seeking direction, declaring truth, and aligning choices. This specificity anchors the day. Without it, effort disperses. Prosperity struggles to emerge in a scattered environment because growth requires focus. Routine alone is insufficient. Repetition without intention becomes ritual, and ritual without awareness loses power. Activation requires consciousness. It requires recognizing that engagement is taking place with purpose. This is why Scripture emphasizes understanding alongside obedience. Awareness ensures that actions are aligned with meaning, not merely habit. Morning engagement also trains responsiveness. By consistently aligning early, sensitivity to guidance increases. Decisions throughout the day feel less forced because direction has already been established. This reduces anxiety and hesitation. Prosperity is supported by this stability because consistent decisions create consistent outcomes. Many confuse surrender with inaction. Scripture does not support this confusion. Surrender aligns the will, it does not disengage it. Activated faith moves within alignment. The morning is where surrender and action converge. One submits intention, then steps forward accordingly. This balance prevents both striving and stagnation. Resistance often arises at this point. Activating blessing challenges comfort. It requires choosing intention over impulse, structure over convenience. Yet Scripture consistently reveals that what is resisted at the beginning becomes burdensome later. Early engagement may feel demanding, but it simplifies what follows. Complexity is often the result of delayed alignment. Prosperity flourishes where expectation is paired with action. Hope alone does not build. Engagement does. The morning provides a daily opportunity to reinforce this partnership. Each intentional beginning strengthens the connection between promise and practice. Over time, this consistency produces measurable change, not because of intensity, but because of alignment. Activation is also protective. When blessings are engaged intentionally, they are stewarded wisely. Passive reception often leads to misuse, but active engagement fosters responsibility. Scripture ties increase to stewardship because unmanaged blessing becomes destabilizing. Morning alignment establishes the mindset required to handle growth without losing direction. Ultimately, the difference between hoping for blessing and activating it lies in participation. Scripture invites engagement, not observation. The morning is the designated entry point into this participation because it shapes everything that follows. Those who approach the day intentionally do not merely wait for favor, they walk in alignment with it. Activating morning blessings is not about controlling outcomes, but about cooperating with design. It acknowledges that divine order invites human response. When response is intentional and timely, promise and practice converge. Prosperity then ceases to be an abstract hope and becomes a lived reality, unfolding steadily within a life that is consistently aligned from the very beginning of each day.